Okay, so today we're going to talk about programming 101, how to set up a program that works. Okay, this is not a specific methodology or anything like this. These are the things we need to consider as a coach or an athlete or an individual that's going to set up an effective program. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few specific things and some key areas that we need to consider, but it's not going to cover absolutely everything you want because it's programming 101. Okay. So these are the initial things we're going to have to consider, whether we are programming for ourselves, an individual or a team. Okay, is experience. Number one is understanding the level of experience, so we can set up our progressions in terms of complexity of modalities, where we're starting, where we're going, limitations, expectations, etc. Understanding the sport or the goal is an individual that just wants, a primary goal of getting fitter or faster or losing weight, or is it a sport-based goal? Are we working with a high power output sport? Are we working with one that requires, a lot of minimized ground contact time? Is it an individual sport or a team sport? And what influences do those have on our training modalities or prescription? And then the modalities themselves, we do have to understand the 8 main modalities that I consider the most important to be in all training programs. Frequency, then we have to identify basically the influence of the time variable, how many times we're going to be able to train a week, how often, what intensity and volume is associated with that. And then we can put together a final product. So the 4 main groups of people that we're going to find in an environment, a training environment, the newbie, then someone who's never worked out before. Maybe they've played sports and they've been in somewhat of a competitive environment. But the reality is they don't have any real experience with lifting. The low experienced person, someone with typically less than 12 months of experience with no real structured programming. Maybe they have followed something online, but they don't really have a good understanding, and maybe they haven't been training with a lot of intensity. That intermediate area, someone that's been in the game for about 1 to 3 years, they're still seeing a lot of progress in, their strength and their body change, et cetera, but capped out around on the high side of 1.5 body weight ratio in those squat, deadlift, and bench, which is good for a lot of those movements. But they haven't had a lot of complexity in their training, or maybe they've just been flip-flopping between programs. And then the advanced, 5+ years, they're starting to see a stagnation in their progress. They have great body weight ratio in those main lifts. They're very strong, but it's that stagnation of improvement that kind of indicates that you're probably in the advanced category. Now, goals versus needs. This is a big mix-up or a big trip-up for a lot of people, is misinterpreting the goals versus needs. So a lot of athletes, and let's tailor this more towards the athletes, tend to either want to get stronger, they want to jump higher, they want to be faster. Okay, but those are goals. Those are goals, and how we're going to facilitate training and prescribe specific exercises in their hierarchy, it's going to be based on the needs based on their goals. So if we're just looking at getting stronger, the 2 main things we can consider is the rate of force development, how fast we're creating that force and how much force we can generate, or muscle size, which then is going to dictate our approach from, is it a mechanical deficiency or is it a force generation deficiency? So then if it is force generation, then to get stronger, we do need to get stronger. We need to amplify our maximum expression of force so that we can express that at a quicker rate. And then in turn, we get faster. But if it's simply a mechanical deficiency, then we can look at improving how they're moving mechanically, how if there's specific joints, ligaments, or muscles that are tight, stiff, unstable, we can then go in and provide exercise prescription to facilitate mechanical deficiency and help with their mechanical efficiency to then allow them to express force without as much metabolic cost. Okay, so that's just a roundabout way to say that our needs have to match our goals, and we have to be able to strip back everything and identify what the actual problem is. Just looking at getting faster, it could be a metabolic efficiency thing. Maybe they don't have a very good VO2 max or efficiency to actually utilize oxygen. So then they fatigue a lot faster, so that their movement mechanics degrade a lot faster, and then they're not as fast as they possibly can. So we can go back, get better condition, move more efficiently, and then we can effectively run faster at a lower cost. And then the same goes for jumping, and we break those down between RFD and elasticity compliance. Those are just two examples for each one of those main goals that we see with a lot of athletes, but it's something we have to consider, that if we do have enough of a science background, we can go back or just use the literature and understand that things break down and there's specific areas that we can target to amplify the intended goals based on the needs of those goals. The 8 modalities, these are things we find in all programming. Okay, you can program without a squat, a hinge, push, pull. There's plenty of programs out there, but an efficient program, and if you're programming for someone from a beginner to an advanced level, it's typically going to include most of these modalities in a daily training environment. Whether you are training 1 day a week or 5 days a week plus, which we'll cover in the next slide, these foundational movements need to come up in some area, as they have the highest carryover and beneficial gains for their respective biomotors, whether strength, hypertrophy, muscular endurance, or conditioning. Okay, so that is squat, hinge, push, pull, carry, jump in a cyclical conditioning, like a long distance, long duration, aerobic based conditioning, and the higher intensity cardiac output of anaerobic style training, multiple modalities, high intensity intervals, short work, long rest, stuff like that, repeat sprintability. So then now we consider our frequency. Are we going to train 1 time a week, 5 times a week? We can train up to 7 times a week, but if we're looking at just general population and for most team sports in athletes, 1 to 5 is that zone. So 1, you're only training once a week. It's going to have to be a high intensity and a high volume training session. Full body, you're going to have to touch on strength and hypertrophy, conditioning, core, everything in that day. If you don't consider your conditioning day as 1 day, if you're focusing just on weightlifting, for example, then it's going to be a full body day, working on trying to touch at least 1 modality per biomotor. So 1 strength, 1 hypertrophy, and then accessory for both of those based on the squat, hinge, push, pull, carry. 2 days, still have a high, moderate intensity, maybe 2 full body days with integrated conditioning or offset with conditioning. 3 days, a very great model for in-season training of athletes in particular, where you can go from a high to a moderate intensity, or an inverse relationship between intensity and volume, where our volume reduces, our intensity goes up. Or you can use 3 full body days with 1 to 2 cardio days, mixture of strength and hypertrophy and power, so we can hit multiple biomotors within season. So we're never really losing any adaptations if we happen to do prior phase potentiation, which we can discuss later. 4 times per week is a good way to mix modalities. You can start integrating, fixed focused days. So just a strength day, or just an upper strength day, just an upper hypertrophy day, or just a strictly conditioning day. And then 5 days is a pretty classic split where you're on that 3-1-2-1 ratio. Up push pull legs, or upper strength, upper hypo, lower hypo, and conditioning. Pretty conventional. Movement hierarchy is a very integral. It doesn't have to be overly specific, but this is a guideline that we can look at typically, and we'll talk about this shortly, is how we want to center our highest metabolic requirement at the top and our lowest at the bottom. And then we also can consider that certain things like muscular endurance, hypertrophy, and conditioning tend to see augmentation and gains in a fatigue state. So we can put those after our more CNS centered lifts. So things, when I say CNS, central nervous system, things that are going to require a lot of instantaneous or a maximal requirement of energy. So max strength, sub-max strength, repeated effort at a high intensity, those are going to require a lot of energy, a lot of recovery time, and it's going to have a lot of fatigue on your central nervous system. So we order those first. Okay, one thing that's not here, what we'll touch on after, in that max strength area, is our max force expression at speed and velocity, so power. Okay, those are going to be ordered above max strength, and we'll get into that shortly. Conditioning has a high metabolic cost, whether aerobic or anaerobic, but it also has a high hindrance on our max and submax strength. So to mitigate that, and because it sees benefits in a fatigue state, we put that at the bottom. So picturing this in exercise order, that power, like I mentioned, you need an instantaneous expression of force at a high velocity. So you're going to put that first. It has a high recovery time, or a quicker recovery time, but it also depletes at a higher rate than everything else. So we put those first. That's like a plyometric, an Olympic lift, or a jump. That strength movement in all your secondary, tertiary, accessory work, whether it's strength from a bilateral or unilateral compound lift, or it's a high CNS demand and hypertrophy or muscular endurance, that's going to come after your strength, as we indicated in the slide before. And this could be your squat, it can be your hinge, your push, or your pull, in whatever order, but in particular here we just use the squat, hinge, then push, then pull in those auxiliary positions after your main strength movement of squatting. And then accessory work can be unilateral or open chain. It can be for the other movements as well, but typically we put those later on. And then conditioning, cyclical or field-based, sport-based conditioning. An example is just bike intervals. So that's how we would order based on energy systems and energy requirement. Here's a list of just some examples, some regressions, progressions to certain all the modalities. So for jumping, we could start someone off with a drop landing. So we're getting the benefits of landing mechanics, deceleration, and learning how to manipulate forces. So just dropping off a small plate and landing in a favorable position that would then translate to being able to jump more effectively. That's an easy regression. It's a basic thing. Anyone can realistically do it. But we can progress it all the way up to hurdles with multiple directions. We're looking at vertical and horizontal displacement. You can vary the height of the hurdles. You work on targeting plyometrics, where we're emphasizing actually getting over things with good mechanics. And we see that along all the modalities, from goblet squat or an air squat all the way up to a back squat, from accessory using step-ups to a decline bench, where we start to see variations of the other main movements. One we don't have in here is core and carrying. The most effective way to build your core and all 6 components of it is to carry modalities. So we could just be carrying farmer carry, single arm carry. We could do front rack holds, and then isometrics and rotational and anti-rotational core, where we're doing like Pallof press, oblique rotations, etc., etc. And that's a little more complexity that we can cover in programming 201, if you will. But that's how you should approach core training as well. Sets and reps, like what goes where, and these are just guidelines, but typically strength, in your max area, you've programming 1 to 5 sets, and you're aiming to hit 1 to 3 reps from 90 to 100%. Your sub max is 2 to 6 at 1 to 6 reps, 75 to 90%. Hypertrophy, to muscular endurance, we tend to just see an increase in sets and reps and a low reduction in overall intensity in terms of percent of 1 RM. If we go back a couple slides, you can see we also use auto-regulation in the form of RPE scale, so rate of perceived exertion, where typically your strength is within that 1 to 3 reps of failure, ideally in that 2 to 1 area. Hypertrophy is anywhere from 2 to 4. Muscular endurance, we're seeing like upwards of 5 plus. So we can use auto-regulation instead of percent maximum. And then aerobic and anaerobic, typically things over 3 minutes in that zone 2 heart rate, the 70 to 80% heart rate max is our aerobic zone that we want to typically be in. And then accumulating more volume over time. In a higher volume state, we'll see, not necessarily always, we see great VO2 max improvements with high intermittent anaerobic style training over a longer volume. But typically, if we're just setting up a base program, aerobic is going to be the longer steady state conditioning, and aerobic is going to be those shorter bursts of high intensity, high heart rate intervals. So here's a sample week. If we were lifting 3 times a week and with 2 conditioning, so basically a 5-day per week, or you can strip away the conditioning, integrate it into the 3 days, or just have the 3 lifting days. We go a full body aerobic conditioning, full body rest, full body aerobic conditioning, rest. So if we look at day 1, if we just recall our ordering of exercises, we have that power. So we have our drop landings, we have, or our jump, that more instantaneous requirement of energy. We have our high stressors, primary, secondary, and tertiary. We have the back squat, reverse lunge, and dumbbell floor press, where we're integrating both strength and hypertrophy work. Then we have our accessory hypertrophy, unilateral dumbbell row and barbell bicep curls, which is additional accessory work. And then we have our carry, that dumbbell farmer carry, where we're moving specific load or unspecific load for a specified distance or duration. When we look at our cyclical conditioning, using multiple modalities, so we're using sets and rep ranges that are within the hypertrophy and muscular endurance realm. But because we're stringing together multiple modalities and we're working under a certain duration with specified rest intervals, we're hitting that aerobic system. And if you shorten it and add intensity and a longer rest interval, for example, we could hit anaerobic. And then full body, we're transitioning from more of a strength to a strength speed style full body. We're resting, and on Friday, hitting a strictly more speed-based one. So we touch on some lower percentage, higher velocity strength movement with a higher velocity bilateral trap bar deadlift, for example. And then we accessorize based on what we need or what we haven't hit yet and on the modalities required. Hit some isometric and some rotational, anti-rotational core. And we hit a nice 45-minute zone 2 aerobic-based training on Saturday and rest on Sunday. So that's maybe more on a complex side to give you an idea of how far we can progress certain movements, but we can regress all of these exercise selected based on the table before and plug them in, and we're still getting the same intended outcome, but based on the experience and requirements, goals, needs of our individual or team sports. Now, further consideration of mesocycles, this is a little more complex and something we'll cover more, but it's your biomotor focus. And if you're going to decide to do phase potentiation, for an example here, where this particular athlete needs to have more of an emphasis in their sport of plyometrics and conditioning, maybe a high output intermittent sport, like volleyball or something like that. But their needs earlier in the season, as they transition from off-season to in-season, was definitely building size and strength. So we use linear periodization and phase potentiation to get them to a state in which they've augmented their strength and muscle size. But then throughout the season, we're emphasizing the sport-required biomotors of power and conditioning. So that's something you have to consider and to be touched on in further examples. And then from a macrocycle standpoint, are we going to use this phase potentiation like I explained of maybe we're using a general physical preparedness, strength hypo, strength and the strength hypo again, because it's a more of a strength power-based sport that requires lots of muscle mass and force output. But based on all these, we can put together a program. We can mix and match modalities. We can mix and match sets and reps, and we can take from this list an example of any of them to regress and progress based on the needs of our clients, our teams, or ourselves. So this is programming 101. It's pretty simple, lots of words, lots of things to focus on, but go through the slides and understand that if we can match the modalities to the needs, we can come out with a product that's basic, that's very easy to follow, easy to progress, and that's going to simply provide results. That's programming 101. Let me know if you're interested in hearing more, need more specifics. Contact me through my email. We can have discussions. Always happy to discuss anything. And if you're looking for online one-to-one coaching as a coach who wants to learn how to coach better, I'm open for conversations. I can guide on that side. And if you're looking to have a coach one-on-one, always looking for clients that are willing to work and understand and learn and want results. That's how I operate. So Enjoy. Thanks.